The realtor warned, "Don't go into the basement." I ignored him and moved in. At midnight, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. When I looked through the keyhole, I saw something that wasn't human. I'm Savannah, a 68-year-old woman with neatly trimmed gray hair and eyes that have seen it all. After a lifetime dedicated to teaching literature at a public high school in the heart of Boston, and having raised 2 independent children who were now living their own lives, I decided it was time for a radical change. I no longer wanted the predictable routine, the afternoon teas with friends, or the TV show binges. I wanted an adventure, a challenge, something that would take me out of my comfort zone and make me feel alive again. And that's how I stumbled upon the most unusual advertisement I'd ever seen. Historic Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts. For sale for $1. Yes, you heard that right. A single dollar. It wasn't just any bargain. It was a property with a reputation as dense as the fog that often covered the town. The house, built in 1888, was known for being, well, haunted. Stories of nocturnal whispers, objects moving on their own, and a chilling presence in the basement were passed down through generations. But I, Savannah, had always been an inveterate skeptic. Ghosts? Nonsense. Stories to scare children and credulous tourists. What I saw was a unique opportunity to renovate a piece of history, to apply my organizational skills, and who knows, find a new purpose for this phase of my life. The realtor, a pale, sweaty young man named Gary, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a visibly tight suit, tried to dissuade me with an almost comical urgency. "Mrs. Savannah," he began, his voice choked. "This house has peculiarities. No one can stay in it for more than one night. The former owners, the Blackwood family, simply disappeared decades ago. And please don't go into the basement. There's a very serious reason it's sealed off." He looked at me with a seriousness that almost made me laugh, but I held back. "Gary, my dear," I replied with a confident smile. I spent 40 years dealing with rebellious teenagers in high school, and believe me, nothing scares me more than a classroom full of hormones and the prospect of grading 30 essays on Hamlet. I signed the papers, took the rusty keys, and with a sense of excitement I hadn't felt in years, prepared for my new life. The house, even covered in a thick layer of dust and with paint peeling in flakes, was undeniably magnificent. Tall windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, dark wooden floors that creaked with every step, as if the house itself were whispering ancient secrets, and an imposing fireplace in the living room, large enough to hold a small bonfire. The basement, of course, was the only part Gary had really emphasized. A dark, heavy wooden door, with rusty chains and an old padlock, stood at the end of the kitchen hallway, almost hidden. A shiver ran down my spine as I passed it, but I attributed it to the coldness of the house and my vivid imagination. "Nonsense," I muttered to myself, as I began unpacking my boxes, full of books and memories of a more conventional life. I was determined to prove that all those stories were just legends. If you enjoy stories that make you question reality, that grip you from beginning to end, and that leave you on the edge of your seat, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, would you dare to buy a house for $1, knowing it has a dark past and a mysterious basement? My decision to buy the house for $1 was not impulsive, despite what Gary, the realtor, might have thought. After retirement, I realized that life in my Boston apartment, though comfortable and full of memories, had become somewhat stagnant. My children, David and Emily, were already married with their own families, living in different states, and although we visited regularly, I missed a personal project, something to challenge me and fill my days. I've always been a practical, down-to-earth woman, and the idea of a haunted house for me was just a grown-up fairy tale, a superstition that modernity should have eradicated. I saw the architectural potential of the property, the hidden beauty beneath the dirt, the neglect, and the layers of scary stories. I dreamed of restoring the oak floors, painting the walls in light, welcoming tones, and transforming the wild garden into an oasis of peace, perhaps with some old rose bushes and a reading bench. It was a life project, a way to keep myself active, engaged, and, above all, to prove to myself that reason always prevails over irrational fear. The house, which locals called Blackwood Manor, had a rich history, though punctuated by tragedies and mysteries. Built by a merchant ship captain in the late 19th century, it passed through several generations of the same family, accumulating legends and whispers. The most persistent of these said that the last family, the Blackwoods, mysteriously disappeared in 1972, leaving no trace, as if they had been swallowed by the house itself. No one ever knew what happened, and the property remained empty ever since, passing from heir to heir, all afraid to inhabit it, selling it for paltry sums or simply abandoning it. I, however, saw this as an advantage. No overly curious neighbors, no HOA rules, just me and my new endeavor. Solitude for me was synonymous with freedom and focus. Gary's warning about the basement, with its chains and padlock, was what most intrigued people and fueled the legends. But for me, it was just a detail to be resolved. Probably some old plumbing, a serious structural problem, or maybe a rat's nest they didn't want me to see before the purchase, I thought with a shrug. I already had plans to hire a local contractor to inspect everything, including the basement, as soon as I settled in. After all, you don't buy a house for $1 without expecting some details to be fixed, and I was prepared for that. My first night in the house was a mix of extreme exhaustion and almost childlike excitement. Boxes were everywhere, dust still hung in the air, but the feeling of having my own space, a place I would call home, and that would be shaped by my own hands, was exhilarating. I made a simple dinner, a cheese sandwich and a cup of chamomile tea, and sat in the old armchair in the living room, watching the shadows dance on the walls in the soft light of my portable lamp. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the house's wood, and the distant howl of the wind that seemed to sing a melancholic tune through the window cracks. It was a different silence from Boston's, denser, more present, as if the house itself were breathing around me, but I was exhausted. After a full day of moving and initial cleaning, my body craved rest. I decided I would explore further the next day, in the sunlight. I went up the stairs, which groaned under my weight as if protesting, and headed to the master bedroom, which had a stunning view of the garden and the small forest in the back. The bed, an inflatable mattress I had brought, felt like a luxury after so much work. I was ready for a deep, restful night's sleep, convinced that any ghost stories were merely the product of idle imaginations, and Gary, the realtor. Little did I know that the night was just beginning to reveal its true secrets. The old clock in the living room, which I hadn't fixed yet, and which Gary had told me never worked properly, struck midnight with a hoarse, drawn-out clang that echoed through the silent house, breaking the night's stillness. I was in a light sleep, lulled by the day's fatigue, but the sound woke me abruptly. I turned in bed, trying to readjust to the unfamiliar surroundings, when I heard it. A subtle sound, almost imperceptible at first, coming from somewhere below. A dragging, as if something heavy was being moved slowly across a wooden floor. My heart skipped a beat, a strong, unexpected thump. It must be the wind, I thought, trying to rationalize, as I always did. The house was old, and nocturnal sounds were expected, part of the charm of a historic property. But the sound continued, more distinct now, closer. A dragging, followed by a dull thud, like something falling or being placed on the floor. And then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They weren't light footsteps, like a mouse scurrying across the floorboards or a branch tapping against the window. They were heavy, slow, dragging footsteps, as if someone was climbing a staircase, step by step, with an almost palpable difficulty. And they were coming unequivocally from the basement that Gary had warned me not to go into. The basement sealed with chains and a padlock. The basement that I, in my stubborn skepticism and rationality, had completely ignored, considering it merely a maintenance issue. A shiver ran down my spine, and it wasn't from the coldness of the house. It was a primal fear, an instinctual alarm I hadn't felt since my children were small, and I heard a strange noise in the middle of the night, fearing for their safety. I got out of bed, the inflatable mattress letting out a squeak that seemed deafening in the oppressive silence of the night. My bare feet touched the cold wooden floor, and every creak under my weight seemed amplified, echoing through the dark hallway. The darkness of the hallway was almost palpable, dense and suffocating, but a sliver of moonlight entered through the landing window, creating dancing shadows that seemed to move on their own, coming to life. The footsteps continued, closer now, more defined, coming up the main staircase. 1, 2, 3. With each step, the presence seemed to intensify, an invisible weight in the air, an oppression that suffocated me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't scream, I couldn't run. My body seemed paralyzed by terror, a statue of fear in the midst of the darkness. I reached the top of the main staircase, which led to the kitchen hallway. The footsteps had stopped. An oppressive silence settled, more terrifying than any noise, for the absence of sound was filled with an agonizing anticipation. I could feel the presence, a cold, heavy energy emanating from downstairs, as if something was watching me from the depths. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, a frantic drum. Slowly, my hands trembling uncontrollably, I approached the dark, aged wooden banister. I looked down into the darkness that swallowed the kitchen hallway. Nothing, just motionless shadows, which had previously seemed to dance. But the feeling that something was there, watching me, was undeniable, a certainty that defied all my logic. It was then that my eyes fixed on the basement door. The old padlock was open, hanging by a single rusty link. The chains, which had previously been tightly wrapped, lay on the floor, like dead, harmless snakes. And on the door, right at my eye level, there was a small hole, as if a knot in the wood had fallen out or been removed. A morbid curiosity, stronger than the paralyzing fear, propelled me. Slowly, I bent down, my knees creaking in protest, and positioned my eye at the hole. What I saw on the other side made me scream, a scream that tore through the silence of the night and echoed through the walls of the old house. A scream I never thought would escape my throat. A scream that confirmed I was not alone. My scream tore through the night. A raw, primal sound I didn't know I was capable of emitting. It wasn't a fleeting gasp of surprise, but a shriek of absolute terror coming from the depths of my soul. What I saw through that small hole in the basement door defied all logic, all the reason I had cultivated in 68 years of life. It wasn't a rat, nor a broken pipe, nor even the shadow of a swaying branch. It was something that didn't belong to this world, or at least not to the world I knew. The vision was distorted, blurred by the darkness and my own disbelief, but unmistakable. In the center of the basement, which I expected to be empty and dusty, there was a figure, tall, slender, with disproportionate limbs that contorted at unnatural angles. It had no face, or at least not one I could recognize as human. Its skin, if you could call it that, was a sickly gray, and it seemed stretched over a bony structure that protruded grotesquely. But what really made me scream, what etched that terrifying image into my mind, were the eyes, two glowing orbs, an intense crimson staring directly at me through the keyhole. There were no pupils, just a scarlet glow that seemed to pierce my soul, a cold, malevolent intelligence that told me this was not an illusion, not a trick of light. This thing was alive, and it was watching me. The air in my lungs refused to obey. My legs, previously paralyzed, now trembled uncontrollably, threatening to give way. I recoiled from the basement door with a start, tripping over my own feet and falling backward onto the cold floor. The impact brought me back to reality, but the image of those red eyes continued to burn in my retina. I crawled backward, away from the door, my eyes fixed on it, expecting the figure to materialize at any moment. Silence returned, but now it was a silence laden with dread. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, seemed like a premonition of something terrible. My mind, the mind of a literature professor, desperately tried to find a rational explanation. A hallucination? Extreme fatigue? The stress of moving? But the coldness emanating from the basement door, the feeling of being hunted, was too real to ignore. I wasn't crazy. I had seen it. And it wasn't human. The figure made no more noise, didn't try to open the door, but its presence was as palpable as the fear suffocating me. I could feel its gaze, its interest, its hunger. I got up, staggering, and ran. I ran to the bedroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Not that a wooden door could stop something that seemed to defy the laws of physics. I threw myself onto the bed, covering my head with the blanket, like a scared child. But it was no use. Those red eyes were etched in my mind, and the feeling of being watched persisted. The house, which once seemed like a life project, was now a trap, a Victorian nightmare I had bought for $1. And I, the inveterate skeptic, was trapped in it, with something that wasn't human. The night dragged on in an eternity of terror. Every shadow, every creak of the house, every gust of wind transformed into the shapeless figure I had glimpsed in the basement. I couldn't sleep. I lay huddled in bed, eyes wide open, listening, waiting. The sun finally rose, painting the Salem sky with shades of orange and pink, and with it came a faint relief. The daylight, however weak, seemed to drive away the shadows, and with them, part of my dread. But the image of the red eyes persisted, an indelible stain on my memory. I knew I couldn't stay there. The house, which once represented a new beginning, was now a constant reminder of the horror I had witnessed. With trembling hands, I began to pack my few bags. There was no time to unpack everything, only to grab the essentials. As I threw my clothes and books into the suitcase, my eyes fixed on the basement door, which was still closed, but now seemed to emanate an aura of threat. The padlock and chains were on the floor, exactly as I had seen them. The figure had not tried to follow me, had not forced the door, but the feeling that it was there, waiting, was overwhelming. As I descended the stairs, My steps were cautious. Every creak of the wood made me jump. I needed to get out of there. I needed help. But who would I tell? Gary, the realtor, who already thought I was eccentric? My children, who would probably think I was losing my mind? I, the literature professor, the woman of reason, couldn't just say I had seen a monster in the basement. No one would believe me. When I reached the kitchen, a strong smell of mold and damp earth hung in the air, coming from the basement door. I hurried towards the exit, but before I could reach the doorknob, I heard a soft knock on the front door. My heart pounded again. Who could it be? I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated, but curiosity, or perhaps the hope that it was someone normal, propelled me. I opened the door, and there she was. A woman with long silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and a gentle smile. She wore a long, flowing, emerald green dress and carried a wicker basket full of herbs and flowers. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice soft and welcoming, like a balm to my frayed nerves. "My name is Elara. I'm your neighbor. I saw you moved in and thought I'd bring a little welcome gift. An herbal tea to calm your nerves. This house has a peculiar energy." She looked at me with an understanding that disarmed me. There was no judgment in her eyes, only an ancient wisdom. "You seem to have had a difficult night, Savannah." I didn't know how, but she seemed to know. Elara, the neighbor, the unexpected help, had arrived at the exact moment. Eleanor's diary was a window into a nightmare slowly unfolding. Sitting at the kitchen table with Elara beside me, I read the yellowed pages, feeling the weight of the words and the author's growing despair. Elara, with her enigmatic calm, just listened, occasionally nodding, as if she already knew everything. The chamomile tea in my cup had grown cold, but I barely noticed. My mind was immersed in the Blackwood tragedy. Eleanor described how her husband, Captain Elias, once a vibrant and ambitious man, had become obsessed with an artifact he brought back from one of his voyages to the Far East. She called it the Black Stone, a polished obsidian object, the size of a fist, that pulsed with a faint reddish light. The captain believed the stone contained the secret to immortality, or an unimaginable power, capable of controlling life itself. He hid it in the basement, transforming the space into a private laboratory, where he spent hours, days, weeks, ignoring his family and his own sanity. He spoke to it. To the stone, Eleanor wrote in an entry dated 1895, whispered secrets, promises, said it understood him, that it fed him visions of grandeur. But I saw what it truly did. It consumed him. His eyes, once full of life, became empty, hungry, his skin pale and cold. He was no longer my Elias. The Black Stone, instead of granting power, was a parasite, a spiritual anchor that fed on the negative emotions and vital energy of the house's inhabitants. Fear, sadness, anger, hopelessness, all were a feast for the entity residing in the artifact. Subsequent diary entries detailed the slow, agonizing deterioration of the Blackwood family. The children, once full of joy, became apathetic, sickly, their laughter replaced by a morbid silence. Eleanor herself felt her life force drain away, her mind clouded by a constant fog of despair. "The thing in the basement is growing," she recorded, her handwriting shaky. "It feeds on us, on our pain. We are no longer the Blackwoods. We are part of it. Our souls are trapped, twisted. The basement is not a prison for it, but a womb. It is being born from us." The revelation hit me hard. The Blackwood family hadn't disappeared. They had been absorbed, their essences becoming part of the entity that Captain Elias had brought home. The shapeless figure I saw, those red eyes, was not a ghost in the traditional sense, but a manifestation of the Black Stone itself, or perhaps an amalgam of the tormented spirits it had consumed. The basement was not sealed to protect the world from the entity, but to protect the entity from the world, to ensure its food remained confined. "It's a parasitic spiritual anchor," Elara explained, her voice grave. "It has rooted itself in this house, in this land, and feeds on suffering. We cannot kill it, Savannah, but we can cut it off from its source, free the souls it has imprisoned, and finally bring peace to this house." The truth, however terrifying, was a relief. I wasn't crazy. And now, I knew what needed to be done. With the truth revealed by Eleanor's diary and Elara's wisdom, Blackwood Manor ceased to be just a haunted house and became a spiritual battlefield. The complication was not just the entity's presence, but the need to free the Blackwood family's souls, trapped in their torment. Elara, a practitioner of ancient Salem traditions, explained that the Black Stone was a nexus of shadows, an object that opened a portal to a plane of existence where negative emotions were the currency. To close this portal and free the souls, We would need a ritual of purification and an unwavering act of will. We need to go to the basement, Savannah, Elara said, her blue eyes shining with determination. And we need to go now, before the entity grows even stronger with your fear. My stomach churned, but the image of the red eyes and Eleanor's despair in her diary gave me a courage I didn't know I possessed. I was no longer the skeptical literature professor. I was the guardian of this house, and I would free the souls trapped within it. We descended the kitchen stairs, the smell of mold and damp earth intensifying with each step. The basement door was open, the padlock and chains lying on the floor, as if torn off by an invisible force. The darkness inside was almost absolute, but Elara lit a bundle of sage, and the aromatic smoke began to dance in the air, illuminated by the lantern I held. The basement was larger than I imagined, with rough stone walls and a dirt floor. In the center, on a makeshift pedestal of old boxes, there it was, the black stone. It pulsed with a faint, reddish light, almost imperceptible, but I could feel its oppressive presence. A coldness that seemed to suck the warmth from my body. Elara began to chant in an ancient language, her voice echoing through the stone walls. She scattered dried herbs in a circle around the black stone, drawing symbols on the floor with a white powder. The entity didn't like it. The air grew heavy, and whispers began to echo through the walls, distorted voices full of pain and anger. "Go away, intruder! And you don't belong here. Join us!" I could feel fear trying to overwhelm me, but I clung to Eleanor's image, to her courage in recording the truth. "Savannah, you need to touch the stone," Elara instructed, her voice firm but tense. "Feel the pain, but don't surrender to it. Think of the souls that need to be freed. Think of justice." I hesitated for a moment, but then, with a defiant cry that came from the depths of my soul, I reached out and touched the black stone. A searing pain shot through my arm, as if 1,000 needles were piercing me. Fragmented images flooded my mind. Captain Elias, his eyes empty. Eleanor crying in despair. Children, their faces contorted in agony. The entity tried to consume me, to drag me into the darkness, but I resisted. I focused on Eleanor's words, on her search for truth. "You won't have me," I screamed, my voice echoing in the basement. "You will be free." The stone's red light began to flicker. The entity writhed, and a sharp, non-human scream filled the basement. Elara intensified her chants, and the sage smoke grew denser. Suddenly, with a deafening crack, the black stone shattered into 1,000 pieces, and a wave of pure white energy swept through the basement. The smell of mold disappeared, replaced by a fresh, clean scent. The oppressive cold dissipated, and a sense of peace filled the air. The voices, once tormented, now whispered, "Thank you." Free. Peace, justice had been served. The sunlight streaming through the small basement windows had never seemed so bright. Dust still floated in the air, but the oppression, the cold, and the smell of mold had vanished, replaced by a feeling of lightness and tranquility. Elara and I looked at each other, exhausted, but with a sigh of relief. The black stone was in pieces, its reddish light extinguished, and the souls of the Blackwood family finally were at peace. I, the skeptical literature professor, had witnessed and participated in something that defied all my rational understanding, and emerged from it a transformed woman. In the following days, the house seemed to breathe again. The creaks of the wood now sounded like the murmurs of an old house settling, not the wails of trapped spirits. The icy atmosphere gave way to a welcoming warmth, and even the garden, once wild and gloomy, seemed to flourish with new vitality. I began the renovations with renewed enthusiasm, but with a deep respect for Blackwood Manor's history. The oak floors were restored, the walls painted in soft tones, and the garden, now an oasis of rose bushes and aromatic herbs, became my sanctuary. My friendship with Elara blossomed. She became a confidant, a guide to a world I never knew existed. I learned from her about the Earth's energy, about the importance of honoring the past, and about the resilience of the human spirit. My children, David and Emily, visited a few weeks later. They noticed the change in the house, and even more so, the change in me. "Mom, you're different," Emily said, her eyes scanning the now bright and lively living room. Happier, more radiant. I smiled, knowing that the real change was within me. I never told them the full details of my first night in the house, or the ritual in the basement. Some truths are hard to accept, and I didn't want them to doubt my sanity. But I told them about the Blackwood family's story, about the tragedy and redemption, and about how the house was now a place of peace. The basement, once a place of terror, was transformed into a safe storage space, with a new door and a new padlock, but this time to protect what was good, not to imprison evil. Blackwood Manor, bought for $1, became my home, a testament that not everything can be explained by logic, and that the courage to face the unknown can lead to the greatest discoveries. I, Savannah, the skeptic, had found a new perspective, a new adventure, and a new way of seeing the world. And sometimes, the greatest treasures are hidden in the darkest places, waiting to be set free. If you've ever encountered something inexplicable, or if this story has made you think about the secrets walls hold, leave your comment, share, and subscribe for more stories that defy reason.